Hello, this is Steven Al, and yes, we're back with another Green Hornet 66 episode review. Today, we'll be doing the series' first ever two-parter in The Beautiful Dreamer Part 1. So without any further ado, let's head straight into this review. We begin this episode with immediately the Green Hornet and Kato in the Black Beauty driving over to some Dr. Widely. Why? Well, that answer is not question. The question to that answer is, well, still escapes us. Well, we cut to his home where he is having a frantic telephone call with some person saying he won't be a party himself to this criminal scheme and threatens to go to the police. Now, we know that's not a great, well, thing to do in a situation like this. So as he tells his secretary he's leaving, the secretary just happens to get a call, obviously from the Green Hornet, telling her where's the Dr. Wiley. She says he's pretty much stepping out. We then see him Wiley walking down the street where he is essentially attacked by an armored car. The Green Hornet and Kato are obviously too late to save him and quickly drive away. A bunch of questions are raised. What's going on? And well, after the opening credits, we kind of get our answer. We then cut back to Britt Reed's house where Frank Scanlon comes in, obviously wanting to know what has happened, why was he there, and Britt Reed gives him some answers. Britt reveals to Scanlon that he had this phone call from a woman named Harriet. He plays a recording of the phone conversation, which he just so happens to record, and basically, this woman named Harriet revealed to Britt Reed, whom she was trying to get in contact with, that Professor Wiley was to be murdered tonight. The phone conversation kind of gets abruptly ended when a guy says that Mr. Eden needs her at the Tangerine Room, and the conversation ends there. Frank Scanlon still is kind of confused. Why would she call him, and what was this conversation about? However, Frank Scanlon starts to put the pieces together. He realized that's at the Tangerine Room, and that said Eden. He came to the conclusion that there is this famous spa in the city, called the Vale of Eden, owned by a Mr. Eden. It's very posh, very expensive, and the rooms are named in certain fashion, such as the Tangerine Room. Putting that piece together, Britt Reed obviously thinks that his best course of action is to head there now. But not before he tries to literally call up the place. Here we then cut to Mr. Eden, our villain for this two-parter, in his office. As a result, one of Eden's secretaries come in explaining that there's a person on the phone wanting to talk to Harriet and basically would like her contact details. Again, even in the 60s that would have risen a red flag, but hey, it is what it is. As a result, Mr. Eden goes to the phone and goes on the conversation and basically to try to get a bit of information about who's on the phone, and basically says how he can't give out any details, but if he would leave a name and a phone number. But before he could complete the sentence, he's quickly cut off. Immediately, Eden is suspicious of Harriet. And just as that's happening, of course, we then cut to nighttime, where the usual Green Hornet and Kato wrap up in the Black Beauty and head their way to the Vale of Eden, of course, after hours. They then literally break their way into the place and go around looking within the spa, trying to obviously find some pretty much her contact details in order to find, find Harriet, I'm guessing. Just as that happened, two henchmen just happen to pull up, hop out of the car, and make their way into the Vale of Eden. Holding the two at gunpoint and essentially drawing closer, this gets into a very short fight scene. But then again, I don't care when we get to see Bruce Lee in action fight these two. After the two are knocked out, they go through the files and find out where this woman Harriet is, and quickly make their way there. But they are kind of too late, as two other men are taking Harriet out of her apartment, and the Black Beauty begins to chase the car that the two thugs have Harriet in. In order to get them off their tail, one of the hoods throws the woman out of the car, and she is injured. The Black Beauty stops and quickly goes to inspect her to see how she is. But just as that happening, all the civilians come around and think that the Green Hornet did this. They quickly get up, get in the Black Beauty, and drive off. The next day, obviously with the events of the previous night, Casey comes in and reveals why Harriet called up Reed. It turns out she used to work at the Daily Sentinel, particularly as a phone operator. realizing that she stumbled onto something and knew the best person she could trust rather than the police was Reed. So that answers that question. Realizing there is clearly more to be done here, Reed decides it's his best course of action to go to the Vale of Eden along with Casey for a bit of an investigation. Just as Reed and Casey basically enter the spa, they go around and pretty much being acquainted with certain members of the establishment, and also meet Vale of Eden, who of course takes Reed on a sort of tour of the place. Eventually they lead to a certain part of the establishment where it's basically this where they produce music. It's sort of to help calm the patient, where there's also a machine nearby which is like a microphone to speak in. It's explained by Eden that it's pretty much used as this thing to be part of the song, as a sort of way to help calm them. Before he could really explain more, he realized that one of his clients has been left in the tub too long and needs to be taken out immediately, leaving and automatically raising a bit on Reed's radar. Whilst he and Casey are pretty much investigating, what they don't know is they're actually secretly being overlooked and saw by Eden and a few of his associates. And Eden comes to the conclusion that Reed is clearly investigating him because of Harriet. Just as Reed is about to leave, Eden offers him to be a part, to take part in like one of their treatments they have. But Reed says he must leave, but Casey will be fine to stay, and Reed quickly leaves, whilst also taking one of the things with him from the place, with maybe Eden's knowing or not knowing, and quickly essentially makes his way back, and tries to make his way, back to his office. Whilst he's on his way out, he runs into essentially an old friend and drops her off at some jewelry place. Britt Reed, of course, makes his way back to the Daily Sentinel, where Mike comes in, explaining that the jewelry place was robbed, but there's something odd. Not only was many people witnessed the robbery, but the person who robbed and the person that owned the place said that no robbery ever occurred, and the person involved was the same friend that Reed dropped off at the jewelry store. He then makes his way to her to talk about it, but she says that she's never met him, never been there, and that she was never in the Vale of Eden, despite the fact that Reed said he picked her up and took her there. Eventually, Reed makes his way back to his apartment, but also while that is, we also come back to the Vale of Eden, where Casey is leaving after having a great day at the spa, and says that she forgot something. He handed her a gun, and she takes it. We then go back to Reed's apartment, where Reed ends up playing the tape to Cato and Frank Scanlon, showing just a normal thing of music. But when you slow it down, there is some sort of subliminal message. There's essentially subliminal messaging, realizing that was the racket. Basically, Professor Wiley was working on this subliminal messaging technology, and Eden was using it to commit various robberies. But when Professor Wiley found out, did not want to be a part of it, he was naturally to be, bumped off in order to cover his tracks. Casey makes her way into the room, and when Reed asks how did everything go, she said fine, and just as she opens her handbag, points a gun at Reed, and is essentially intending to kill him. But Cato, at the last minute, manages to deflect the gun from shooting anyone. Casey is absolutely shocked at what's happened, and doesn't remember anything, but Reed said that's the aim of the game. That's the point. You're not supposed to. Frank Scanlon, seeing he's had enough, he plans to call up and have Eden arrested. But Britt Reed intervenes, saying with what evidence? The woman that was harmed last night, if she recovers, there's unlikely she'll be able to corroborate your story. Second, the victims have no literal memory of the thing. And Frank Scanlon realizes even the recording tape would be dismissed as evidence. But Britt Reed says, don't worry. The Green Hornet will get evidence. And that's where we end our episode. Not a traditional cliffhanger, but I really do like that it just really amped the story. And I'll talk more about it later in the review. Okay. I like how Casey was used here. She got used a bit into like a sort of thing, and I really like that we're seeing more of her. And also how Frank Scanlon is being used more. We see a complete contrast to how Frank Scanlon is compared to Gordon up in Gotham. Gordon is clearly relies too heavily on Batman, but Frank Scanlon really kinda doesn't. And again, he's also shown to be more confident, less of a goofball, and also shown to be a very astute detective, even contributing to the investigation, helping Reed figure out certain things when he can't. Something that rarely happened with Gordon between Batman. Mike Mike Axford is rarely used and ever mentioned, and again, would love to see Kato play more of a role in the story, but again, we get to see a fight scene, and how he essentially saves Reed from gunpoint is definitely interesting. Britt Reed is still fun as ever, and honestly really contributes. But let's talk about the villain. The main villain here is a mystic. The villain, Peter Eaton, portrayed by Jeffrey Horn, he's another one of those minor actors, not really huge, I guess not really huge, but then again, the Green Hornet villains, very rarely were their actors portrayed by really, I would say, big names, more so up-and-coming names, not really huge guest stars like the Batman show. But just like the previous, I guess, Racketeer in the previous episode, Dirk is portrayed as a completely different gangster. While Dirk was more smooth, calm, this guy is more almost has a bit of aristocratic thing with him. The way he talks and operates this health spa. And again, he's okay, and I like his little gimmick of really just manipulating people's heads to basically have them perform robberies in which he gets a cut out of. Not a bad racket, and definitely, even though it's a bit out there, it still stays true in the realm of being in this more serious and even gritty superhero story. Beautiful Dreamer Part 1 is the series' first two-parter, and I honestly really like it so far. It's certainly fun and interesting, and it plays with a very interesting concept of subliminal messaging. You could poke the flaws in whether it would really work or not, but then again, in TV shows, the element of realism is really not to be taken seriously unless the series is portrayed to be real. True, it takes a more serious approach, but realism also is something it doesn't take fully seriously. It's willing to bend it, but not completely break it. That was Batman. This wasn't. And again, and also the villain here is portrayed as an interesting type of racketeer. Rather than a tough guy gangster or a smooth businessman, we got at a more almost man-about-town type of racketeer. Very interesting. I really like him so far and really find him really fun. And if I could describe this episode, part 1, to be really fun, you can really play that the thing is, it doesn't really have a good cliffhanger. And really, two-parter should really have a cliffhanger. And a good cliffhanger would have been, it should have been, as Casey gets out the gun, it goes to black, and you hear the gunshots, then credits. But then again, I like the cliffhanger they did. This really makes it more personal for Reed, as they try to use a friend of his to essentially kill him, and essentially how she reacted after almost doing so just makes him angry, and really makes this more personal for him than anything else. I really liked that, and it was a really good, interesting thing to really contribute to the story. There we have it, Beautiful Dreamer Part 1. So far, really good start to this two-parter, and very different to the usual two-parters that we usually always saw in Batman. Join us next time when we review the Part 2 to this adventure, but until then, this has been the Steven Hour, and until next time, so long for now.